What is going on, guys? Victor here, back with another video. Now, I wanted to revisit the age-old question of mono, nylon filament line versus braided fishing lines. This is a question I get asked very often through emails and Facebook Messenger, all sorts of stuff, and it's something I really wanted to address. I'm gonna go over the many different applications of both, stress the fact that not one is better than the other. They all have their time and place, and kind of just give you guys an overview of, when you should be fishing one over the other. For demonstration purposes and to kind of fill you guys in, I'm going to be using Bullbuster Braid and Bullbuster Monofilament. They are a company I have been working with for about a year now. You guys know me, I like to really fish a product and test it out before I kind of give it the recognition that it deserves. And as a sponsor, they have been very good to me, so I kind of wanted to give them a nice little shout out. The braid and the mono that I've been fishing for the last year is this stuff. I believe in it. They have very good prices, so if you guys want, check them out. It's going to be in the description box below, and you guys can save 10% on any braided line, any mono line, any leader, all that good stuff. So number one, jumping right into it, we're going to discuss the cost. Now, braided fishing lines, I'd say 10 times out of 10 are going to be more costly than monofilament fishing lines. And what I mean by costly is you're going to be paying more cents per yard, however you want to break it down, than your traditional mono line. Does this make braided lines better? Absolutely not. It all comes down to, manufacturing process, the raw materials used and such, but it doesn't necessarily right off the bat make it a better product. Point number two we're going to bring up is abrasion resistance. Now, mono is the clear winner, and when I'm talking about abrasion resistance, I'm talking about if you need your line for the application you're fishing in areas where you're going to be fishing around structure, rocks, piers, docks, anything that a fish may take you towards a structure and you need some give, you're going to want to fish mono line generally, or at least a top shot, because braid in the same line class, so if you take 40-pound braid and 40-pound mono, that 40-pound braid is going to snap, crackle, pop way faster than 40-pound mono will. 40-pound mono will it'll chafe and keep chafing until it'll break, whereas braid, especially on something sharp, it will just break. So that is one huge key in determining what line you need. Moving on to point number three, we're going to be talking about stretch. And in particular, mono stretches a lot, whereas braid does not stretch a lot. A lot of people think, it's a common misconception actually, that braid doesn't stretch at all, but that's not true. Braid does stretch, just not to the degree that mono does. So some applications where you would need stretch and mono would be important, and the clear winner is if you're fishing for fish such as kingfish, they have soft mouths and hooks can rip out easily. You need some kind of leeway there in that connection. I don't really like braid for kingfish because kingfish have soft mouths, they make fast runs, and hooks tend to pull when you don't fish mono. You need that leeway there. When you're trolling, you want some kind of shock. When you're trolling for dolphin or whatever it may be, big game trolling, the boat's going one way, the fish is going the other way. If you have braid and there's very little stretch, it's just, you're kind of like maxed out in that tension, and it's just, things will go wrong. You're going to be pulling hooks, breaking rods, straightening hooks out. You need that stretch in a lot of instances, and that is where mono is a clear winner. Braid, on the other hand, does not stretch that much, so some advantages it carries if you're fishing in deep water. Let's say you're jigging, you're vertical jigging, or you're fishing down 200 feet of water and you're mutton fishing or grouper fishing or whatever it may be. But bucktails for stripers down deep. With mono, you kind of have a delay in that hook set. You want that direct contact. You want to penetrate that mouth, and that's where braid would be a clear winner. In areas of current, if you're fishing in current, you're going to have a natural bow in your line, and with mono, that bow is going to be even more exaggerated because it's not cutting through the water and it is stretching, and by the time you set the hook, that fish could have already spit your lure. Braid would be a clear winner in that instance again. Moving on to point number four, we're going to be talking about the diameter of the respective lines right here on the table, and this is going to tie into some other things on this list. So braided line, as I said, has a lot thinner of a diameter, for that respective line class versus mono. So 40-pound braid versus 40-pound mono, going to be significantly thinner, smaller profile, more compact package for that same pound test breakage. Number five, line capacity. Now this one is where braid really shines, and it is because you could take two 4,000 size reels, let's say the same manufacturer, the exact same reel, put them side by side. You load one guy up with 10-pound mono, you can put 20-pound braid on the other reel, and you're most likely going to get even more line than the 10-pound mono reel had. Now you're effectively fishing twice the breaking strength line, and that's really really where Braid shines. It allows you to fish reels, you know, it allows you to fish a 4,000 size reel like you would a 6,000 and so on. You know, it allows you to catch big fish on smaller reels because braided lines are stronger, are thinner in their respective, you know, in the relative diameter to a monofilament fishing line. One nice thing about this whole line capacity factor is it reduces the need for bigger reels. It's not universal all throughout, but you know, the guys who are fishing 80 wides are now fishing 50 wides and 50 wides to 30 wides and so on, because a lot of guys have just made that switch to braided fishing lines where you're not limited by your line capacity anymore because braided lines have become thinner and just stronger. So let's talk about line backing. It is something that is very integral to this conversation and something I like talking about. So I like to back the majority of my spinning reels with braided fishing lines. And in particular, my offshore reels, I have those Daiwa BGs, those 5,000s right there. A lot of people would say they're small, but because of the fact that I do back them with the braid, I can fit a ton of line on them. So I'm effectively fishing a reel class smaller than I normally would have to because I back my reel with braid. And it allows me to save money because the majority of the time when you're fishing, you're almost never getting to that half spool, that quarter spool mark, so your braided line is not taking that big of a beating. Mono is cheap, make the initial investment, back your reels up with braid because you're not fishing it that often, and change your mono. You know what I mean? In instances where you need to have a mono top shot, I almost always like to have a braid backing, and it always gives you that sense of security of not getting spooled. And once again, it allows you to fish a smaller reel, tackle the same size fish generally. But you guys can do the exact same thing in the reversal for mono fishing lines. Nowadays, you know, braid is needed for a lot of situations, whether it's high-speed wahoo trolling, you know, guys deep dropping for swordfish, all sorts of stuff. Braid is very, very expensive, especially when you need so much of it. So what you can do is you can actually back your reel with mono because you want to be fishing the braid for the certain situation you're in, and then put a braid top shot, which a lot of people don't really think about. You're never really getting to that mono, and now you don't have to put on, instead of having to put on 4,000 yards of braid, you only have to put in 2,000. You can back your reels up with mono, just like you can back up your reels with braid. And that is one thing that's really neat. You know, I have my 50s, I have them backed up with mono, I have braid on top because filling those things up full of braid, first of all, it's just impractical. Nothing, you know, you don't need that much line generally on a boat. And secondly, it saves you money. Moving on to point number 6 is going to be castability, and this is where braid shines, whether it's freshwater, inshore, offshore, saltwater, you know, whatever it may be. There's a reason people like to fish artificial lures with braid. You know, one of them is the fact that there's no stretch, like I said, you get that direct contact with the fish when you're at that hook set, and another is casting. Braided lines are thinner, they cut through the wind more, they cut through the water more. You can cast them way further generally than you can mono, especially in windy situations. Trying to cast mono in wind is just, it's not easy. You know, braid really cuts through it. But a negative to this is if you're gonna be using, I'm not gonna say cheap, I'm gonna say low quality braids, or some braids just tend to get wind knots. And if you're not an experienced angler, you can tend to get wind knots. And what that is if you guys ever seen kind of a bird's nest, well, you get like a little mini bird's nest in your line. And that is really the only downfall to casting braided fishing lines. But I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're West Coast or East Coast. Guys that are casting, if you're artificial lure fishing, almost always 99% of the time you're gonna be fishing braided lines because you can cast that much further. Moving on to number 7, we're gonna talk about how well these two do in terms of cutting through the water and why you would want it to cut through the water. Going back to the braid right now. Braid shines in areas where you need to fish deep water, especially when you need to make direct contact with the fish way down there. Deep dropping, sword fishing, guys are dropping down 2,000 feet. Vertical jigging, in areas of current. Anytime you really need your line to stay as taut as possible with as little stretch as possible and to really not have a lot of slack, you're gonna want to fish braid. Mono is really not the best in this. You know, you can send 2 50-pound outfits, one with braid, one with mono, with the same size weight on. That braided line is gonna be that much more vertical. You're gonna have a bigger scope in the 50-pound mono line. So if you're, you know, dropping on wrecks, anything of that nature generally is going to be braid preferred. Number 8, I'm going to be talking about pulling power, and this one kind of goes both ways. Since braid doesn't really stretch, when you go to pump on a fish or when you're really going to pull on a fish, you're really pulling on it. You're not really, you know, having to stretch that maul out before you start to pull on that fish. But it also can kick you in the ass because it does the exact same thing on the reversal. Fish fight a lot harder on 20-pound braid than they do on 20-pound mono. And what I mean by that is, I guess what I was really trying to get at is if you're fishing two lines, you know, a braid and a mono of the same line class, the same pound breaking strength on the same reel with the same drag, you're gonna get more drag output with the mono than you will with the braid, because you do have that stretch and fish feel that resistance. And the more mono you have out there, that's just basically like a giant slingshot pulling them back in, and they have to not only fight to get the line off the reel and get that past that drag tension, but they're also having to fight and get that stretch out of the mono as well. Number 9, moving back to the, you know, artificial lure conversation and working lures, braid is generally going to be your friend. You can cast it further, you can work them more effectively generally. You kind of really feel every little bump and subtle twitch of that bait and a paddle tail, whatever you're fishing, you can really feel the vibrations a lot more in braided fishing lines, and you have more direct contact. It's a more intimate experience than with mono for, you know, for so many factors, like I said, with stretch and everything. And so that's generally why you see people fishing braided fishing lines for lures. And that is kind of the general overview, guys. I hope I didn't miss too much. I think I got the majority of what I wanted to say. And so, you know, mono, it's cheaper. For live baiting, 9 times out of 10, I want to have mono and live baiting. I like the stretch. You don't pull as many hooks. Kingfish, there's certain species that I really like mono for. There's certain species I really like braid for. But generally when I'm fishing, or whatever you guys are fishing, it's generally never just going to be, you know, a one or the other. There is no king. Each line has its place in your arsenal. And, you know, really think about, like I said, guys, the braid backing, the mono backing, all that, you know, get creative, think outside the box, and just find new ways to explore and do what works for you. And like I said, if you guys want to check out Bullbuster, it's going to be in the description box below. You guys have seen, I have not pushed their product at all, actually, because I wanted to test it out. But now that I have tested it out for a year and I really believe in it, you know, I wanted to talk about it. So check them out in the description box below. I'll be seeing all you guys, my Landsharks, in that next video.